Welcome to the English Wine Collection's Wine Talks podcast. My name's Guy, and in the second of our interviews, I chat with Richard Brazier from Ancient and Modern Wines. Richard has been working in the wine trade for over 25 years and is one of the finest collections for sale. Richard specialises in rare and highly sought-after wines, including a large range of port. After many years working for Majestic Wines in central London, he decided to leave and set up his own business. In the following interview, Richard recaps stories of his various customers who used to come into the store, including many famous names.
To kick things off, if possible, could you cast your mind back to how your career started and where it all began for you?
Right, yes, I certainly can. I started in hotel management and very quickly realised I didn't like that at any point. But the one aspect I always liked was the learning about wine. And in 1984, when I was working in a hotel in North London, I decided I really must get into the wine trade. It was something I really wanted to do, but it wasn't easy in those days. It was very much old school Thai and traditional wine companies, not like it is today. And wine actually wasn't really drunk so widely as it was today. So I took about 9 months to actually finally get a position in a small wine company in Bedford with a very enthusiastic wine merchant who particularly liked Bordeaux.
What was that called?
Well, it was called Bedford Fine Wines. He had a restaurant as well, but Bedford Fine Wines was a company, and his enthusiasm rubbed off with me, and I found it absolutely fascinating and learnt an awful lot from him. Unfortunately, that only lasted 9 months, but a bit of a blessing in disguise, because then I got a retail shop in W1 in London called Les Amis du Vin, and that was another good step up as well.
What did they do? What was their specialty?
Well, the thing about Les Amis du Vin, it was traditional, but a sort of modern company, and they were the first people to take a New World wine seriously. So about a third of and this was the middle 80s, and you didn't see much from California, Australia, New Zealand in those days. But they had they were one of the first people through Geoffrey Roberts, who was the buyer, to start importing wines that we see regularly now.
Why do you think they chose to do that?
I don't know. He always had this interest, and I think he had contacts in California, and he thought there was a market for them. They were much bigger wines than they are now today, but they certainly had a niche and really took off. He was one of the main instigators of getting New World wines into this country.
What do you mean by bigger wines?
Well, much fuller bodied, really massive, not necessarily alcoholic content, but Californian wines. The first Californian wine I had of those sort of producers was a Firestone Merlot from I think 1979, and the taste lasted for about 3 days in my mouth. It was so intense, and you sort of thought, well, what can we eat with this? Because it was just so big. But they've toned down, and it's interesting how wines from Bordeaux have now sort of got a slightly more California edge to them, a bit riper, and wines from California are a bit more European-like. They're not quite so big as they used to be, big and rich as they used to be. So they've closed the differential quite a lot now.
Do you think that's a good thing?
It is, but I don't really like seeing traditional areas try to copy other areas.
Yeah, of course.
We end up with this global style, which I don't always think is you lose the individual character. And whereas in the past, Rioja had its own style, yet it was quite heavily oaked, and Bordeaux had its own style, and you go into various parts of Italy now, and you could be drinking wines from Australia, and I think that's quite sad.
Do you mean as in terms of the style of the wines, or they've actually got the Australian wines there?
No, very much the style. Very much they sort of think, well, what are people drinking now? Let's try and make our wines like that. So, for example, Sangiovese in Tuscany, making Chianti, and many other wines there. It used to be a brick colour. They always said it was a terracotta or brick colour. But now it just looks like Shiraz from Australia, and they're just sort of heavy, bulking great wines, and I find it really frustrating that they've done that.
So it's more that there's a global wine instead of particular regions.
Yeah, yes, there's too much trying to copy. And of course, the world is a smaller place now with the internet and everything, and people know what everyone else is doing. So they're sort of just making wines to sell rather than wines that are suitable to their climate, to their terroir, and their traditions, really.
Okay. Before we progress forward with some of the new world wines and what you've come across, if we can go back to your time in the shop,
Right.
and when you first got involved. So, what do you think was the key to what you learned there and why you got into the industry?
Well, I'm probably different from some people. I always liked the idea of retail. I like the idea of people coming to me. I'm absolutely hopeless at going to sell to somebody's restaurant or somebody's hotel. But if people come to me and ask for advice, then that's sort of in my element, really. And I just like the way of sort of running the shop myself. People used to come in, there'd be 500 wines around the shelves, and it just sort of, they used to love it. And I suppose I got a bit of a kick, the fact that you'd have sort of top surgeons and top professionals from different areas coming into the shop and asking, well, and actors as well, quite a lot of those. So you coming in to ask your advice, which was quite a bit of an ego trip, I suppose.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can you remember any particular customers?
Well, one of the interesting ones, Chateau Muzar, which is a Lebanese wine, which hopefully people have heard of now. Waitrose started importing it about 35 years ago, and no one had ever heard of it. But Ronnie Corbett first picked it up, and he told all his friends, Geoffrey Palmer and various other, I mean, these are actors from the 80s and 90s. And there were a number of others, and they used to come into the shop and just sort of, because we were one of the few that sold it. We had 10 vintages of it after a tasting. So it was nice to, I mean, Ronnie Corbett's obviously a bit shorter than me, but it was very nice.
Most people are, Richard.
Well, I suppose that is something. But it was just fun to be able to see these people come in. Yes, it was, again, it's made part of the job more enjoyable, I think.
Okay, so can you recall any stories or conversations with any of these people?
Well, the funny thing is, I tell you, they don't always want to talk too much. I mean, actors are renowned for not talking. I remember asking Geoffrey Palmer, who is one of Britain's favourite comedy actors, what he was doing at the moment, and he just ignored me. I wasn't being rude, but they just don't talk about what they're doing until it's done, and so you won't like the answer. But no, with actors, I can't tell you very much.
Okay, so very, very much that they're one person on screen, obviously, but in the private life coming to see you, they were just, I'm here. Well, and also
I always tried to pretend that I didn't know who they were. Yeah. And we had the Doctor who came in, and I can't remember his name now, who was the one with big dark curly hair. And again, I just didn't want him to think I knew who he was, and I was sort of going to say, "Oh, look, guess who it is?"
No, of course.
And when we had George Michael in the shop, I didn't. You just don't say anything. You just treat them like an ordinary customer because that's what they want.
So, can you recall any particular wines that any one of them were interested in? Were they partial to champagne, or for instance, George Michael?
Well, the funny thing about George Michael was he came in just as we were shutting Christmas Eve 25 years ago, and he came in with John Moss, who was with Culture Club and friends and what have you, and he had a mixed case which was about £900, which was then a lot of money.
I think that still is for a case of wine.
Yeah, well, possibly yes. But the thing was that, I don't know, about 10 years later, I better not say who it was, but the company who used to deal with him, the music companies, asked his agent what he would like for what they thought that the agent suggest a wine for his, I think it was his 50th birthday. And I said to them, well, he likes top wines. And they said, oh no, his favourite one is Pinot Grigio, which, as you know, is probably about £5 to £10 and really not inspiring. And I said, well, I can't do Pinot Grigio. I mean, it won't be, it's not much of a present for somebody of that sort of standing and wealth. But so they bought it elsewhere. So I don't know how well that went down. But no, I think that a lot of them did take an interest in Peter Cook was another one. And he used to come in, unfortunately, Peter Cook, in later stages of his career, used to probably drink a bit more than he'd like, but he was always quite a charming person when he came in the shop. And there was one time, if you want a funny story, I can tell you, I will quickly bore you with this one, but it was in Hampstead, And he came in the shop, and unfortunately, for some reason, some people had gone in there to shoplift and locked the manager in the back of the shop.
What was the shop?
Well, it was called the Heath Street Wine Company in Hampstead. And Peter Cook, who I'm afraid was probably already started tasting that day, realised the manager was out the back, and he didn't know what to do. So he just left a note on the desk saying, I couldn't get hold of you, so I've left the money on the till and helped myself to a bottle. And you sort of think, well, could he not call the police or something? But anyway, no, we've had some nice, and they've always been generally pretty good. I think they've been pretty good, yeah.
But what about the wine knowledge with some?
Well, it's almost down to people they were dealing with, because I think wine knowledge was short in those days.
Yeah.
And so this is what you felt you had an obligation to show them new things. And show them wines they would not have had before, because people were so entrenched in it had to be French or it had to be Spanish or Italian. New World wines were not really known. Certainly things like Lebanon, and then obviously South Africa after that. So
were they open to the suggestions of the new?
Yes,
new
they're
wine
pretty
wines?
good, I think. Yes, yeah, generally, and that was again one of the things I liked.
Did they come back though?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did, because they live locally.
And that was it then.
Yeah, that was it.
If we thank you, that's a brilliant story. But if we go back to you getting involved in the wine trade and the industry, have you gone and visited many of the regions?
Well, yes, it's a strange one, this, because yes, I have. Obviously, I've been to most areas, but I'm not sure. I can't say once you've seen one, you've seen them all. But it's the same sort of thing. They show you a long list of their most recent wines. And they tend to tell you how wonderful everything is, and they show you similar sort of fermentation tanks and similar vineyards. And so, I remember at one stage, friends of mine in the trade used to, every spare moment, go off to visit a winery or a chateau. But as I said, well, it gets a bit repetitive after a time, and I learn far more from tasting wines. If we do, one of the things I've done over the years is some really decent, top-notch tastings, sort of usually about 10 wines at a time. Say picks, a chateau like Grand Puy Lacoste, you can taste 10 wines over a period of 50 years. And I'd learn more from that than just being carted round, this is a fermentation tank, this is a maturing barrel. So you learn so much more about just tasting the wines.
And who would you do those tastings with?
Well, there's a shop in South Kensington, which I've done tastings for about 20 years. There's a club in Bristol. Various things. I mean, they're quite high-end, as I say. But my interest in the last 20, 25 years has been old and rare wines, really.
So what about the people who are at these tastings?
Well, they're very much professional people.
Okay.
You're going to want me to come up with some really hilarious names, but
That's up to you.
No, well, the last one I can remember, John Turode turned up to a tasting on MasterChef.
Okay.
And he was very nice. He was sitting next to me. And again, he was asking me questions about wine, which I really liked, because I thought, you will have had contact with wine most of your life. You're obviously a top chef and what have you. And he was just asking me questions, which again was great, and listening. So it was...
Yeah, you had a genuine interest in
absolutely.
wines.
Absolutely, yes.
Did you learn anything from him about pairings? Was he able to reciprocate?
Well, not really. No, not really, and I don't think he wanted to. No, it was all very much about that tasting that evening, and he just asked good questions, as most people do.
Can you remember any of the wines?
Oh gosh, I should look at which tasting it was. I've done about 300 or 400 over the years, so it's difficult to remember them all. I've got all the notes, but I don't think we've got time for that.
No, of course. So on the bottles of wine that people have been drinking, and you've also got memories associated with lots of wines. In your office here and around your house, I mean, just over here to the right of us, you've got all these wonderful empty bottles, which I presume have various meanings, which is why they're here. Can you know any stories behind any of those?
Well, I think the thing is that they were all from tastings over the years. Just on this left hand side, well, it's all the first growths in Bordeaux. Yeah, I did all wines that I can sort of remember, really. It's not just a matter of showing off by looking at some of these, but they were all wines we had at tastings. I always particularly liked sort of Rhones, for example, old Rhones, and we've got Hermitage from Charve, Beaucastel, Châteauneuf du Pape. No, there were some wonderful wines.
Is it particularly just that they were exceptional wines, or do they have a story behind
them?
No,
they were very good wines. There's nothing, dare I say it, in the other room, we have even older bottles. And what I like about those is with the Sauterne bottles, there are a couple around the war years. And of course, around the war years, people have to realise that things were all short. Yes, the Germans wanted to make sure that Bordeaux, for example, was kept as good as possible, but the Bordelais were all trying to hide their wines. They didn't want them. But getting glass was difficult, and normally Sauterne comes in clear glass, and you've got some in green, sort of pale green, pale blue, all sorts of colours, because that's all they could get.
Very rare then.
It is, yes. I mean, there's a bottle in there, I think it's 45 Siglas Rabo, and it's a blue bottle. It's absolutely terrific. One of my favourite bottles, I have to say.
But that's been consumed.
Oh, definitely consumed. Yes, but the bottle is there as a memory.
So, with your business now that you're running from here and exporting around the UK, who are your main customers? Do you find you have a particular base that keeps coming back to you, or is it anyone, like especially with the anniversary bottles that you specialise in?
Well, I would say that the reason we started the company was partly for my interest. I do get bored with going to shops and eating in restaurants where the wines are too young. It's really difficult to find something that's of a good price and that is going to be enjoyable, because obviously top wines take time to develop. The tannins need to dissipate. Everything needs to soften and become a bit more complex. So I was not interested in having very young wines. So we tend to do mature or semi-mature wines that are available by the bottle, not just by the case. That was another aspect of it. And I thought, maybe rather naively, that there would be people queuing up for this sort of thing. But due to the internet as well, it's very competitive now. And so the repeat custom is probably less than I expected. I thought there would be private people that would come back regularly, and it's not that easy, I don't think. In terms of main customers, well, due to the weakness of the pound, we've exported more than we've sold in this country the last 2 years. And that's because, we just have, this country is the best for sourcing wines. Partly because we don't grow any wines ourselves, or we do, sorry, I shouldn't say that. But I mean, in terms of traditional stuff, port, Bordeaux, Champagne, Burgundy, that's what most of the world is really after. And
which part of the world is that?
Well, the Far East.
Okay.
I mean, we sell bits to that. We do sell also port to Northern Europe, which is nice. But port's always been a big traditional thing in this country, as you know.
Yeah.
So that's been very good the last few years. But no, there's not much cheap and cheerful. I mean, on the list starts at about £30 a bottle and then goes up to about 2,000. So it's not, but they use every special occasion, anniversary, or for tastings, or for people with too much money.
So, as you've just mentioned it, the bottle say that's right at the top end and nearer £2,000. Can you talk about that bottle? Wine, rather.
Well, I say specific. I mean, for example, it's very unusual, but there was Petrus, which is Chateau Petrus, one of the top wines in the world, top wines in Bordeaux.
Oh, here. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And we had, and we don't normally hold that sort of level of wine because we're only a small company, but we had bottles of 90 and 89, two brilliant vintages. And I think we sold them for 2,500 a bottle or something like that.
Really?
And
wow.
I was quite pleased to sell them in the end, because otherwise it's a lot of stock to hold in 8 or 9 bottles.
What was it about these particular vintages then?
Well, 1990 is a brilliant vintage because it is so well balanced. And the whole point about wine, and particularly I think Bordeaux, is that you need the balance. There's no point having extremes of concentration or extremely dark colour. It's all about the balance. And 1990 was almost balanced from the word go, so you could enjoy it at a very young age. but it still holds on, and it's just a supreme vintage. And 89 was always very good, but a bit, but still very popular. But this is Petrus is, you know what it's like in the world now with people with money. They want, a lot of it unfortunately is sort of showing off, and a lot of it is just to say, look what I've got, sort of thing. And so they'll pick on a few names. You get it with the Burgundy, with Domaine de la Romani Conti as well. People are climbing over each other to try and get hold of it. It goes, Romani Conti 1990, the Burgundy, that would go for, I think it's about £10,000 or £12,000 a bottle now, probably even more.
Really?
And because I'm afraid it gets escalated because people are constantly saying, I want that bottle. No, I want it. And of course it goes to auction, then they're all bidding against each other, and it just gets silly.
Do you think they're buying it to actually consume? Or
they may well consume, yes, but there'll be a lot of showing of the bottle to other people before they consume it.
Yeah,
I think.
of course.
Come and look at this. Look what I've got.
That's an expensive glass of
It
wine.
is. I suppose people with millionaires, billionaires, they don't worry.
No, it's not as necessary.
No, right.
So with some of these wines and the pairing is key to a lot of this, and finding the right food groups that can match.
Right, yes.
Have you come across any, we'd like to term it sort of the perfect pairing, as it were, that's really complemented the wine?
I suppose my favourite pairing is going to be Sauterne with creme brulee. I think one can be a bit rigid about what to have with it. I mean, obviously you don't have red wine with fish, but I think one can be a bit too sensitive about it. But I always think, for example, with lamb, that Bordeaux goes best with it, but I'm sure there are plenty of other red wines that go just as well with it. So no, I don't think one wants to be too. It used to be quite a regimented thing that you have this with this, and you have this with this, and nothing else.
So tell me more about the wine you just mentioned. That
what
you felt
Sauterne?
Perfectly. What was it in it that?
Well, Sauterne is another one of these wines. As I say, the balance is so important. So it needs the acidity. It can't just be very, very sweet. It needs the acidity. So it has to have that balance. And creme brulee is quite a sweet dessert. Sugar, and more sugar. And for some reason, it just absolutely matches. The acidity seems to balance both aspects of it. And
so the wine was toned down a little bit by the dessert, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, yeah, and it just works really well. If you had something like lemon posset, which is a quite a sharp dessert, then the Sauterne would struggle. But with creme brulee, it's absolutely perfect.
So carrying on with particular bottles, you generally specialise in some of the anniversary bottles, as we've been touched on. Do you find that there's a particular year that's gone down extremely well, or is it's a continual business for you just because?
Well, that's one of the nice things, that people are born or have been
continue to be born.
Well, continue to be born is quite a helpful one. Yes, it's a rather long-term project, that one. But no, certainly because people have been born throughout the year and over the years, there's always going to be demand for it. And unfortunately, when you get to 40, 50, 60, for a lot of people, they've got what they want, and buying a present is very difficult. So you can't go wrong giving somebody a bottle from their birth year. I mean, there are years that obviously are better than others. I mean, if you say like 61 for Bordeaux, which is one of the finest vintages, they are very, very expensive. But I do warn people in less good years. So, for example, 1963 Bordeaux, which is a disastrous vintage, I do say, well, look, this may not well be drinkable. But then they think, well, it's got the date on the bottle, and that's what matters.
Yeah.
So some of them drink it, some of them are warned, but most people just want to get something with the date on it, and looking for the nice label in good condition, really.
Well, it's a nice gift to give somebody.
It is.
I mean, it's quite a rare thing as well.
But the older bottles are, and this is one of the reasons we've always specialised with it, because not many people can be bothered with it.
Sure. Has any really jumped out to you?
Well, not. Yes, I mean, I don't know. I always get excited about, because we've already got stock of the next two. We've got 9s and 0s ready for the next two sets of anniversary years. And so I look at the list and sort of think, oh yeah, we've got some 49 Lafitte, for example, next year. And I like the idea of listing them because we tend to list them from January the 1st. So rather than just putting them on the list the year in advance. So we just sort of put it all together so that it looks like a pretty good list. So no, every year there's always something that is very good. And but we do tend to try and get them in good condition. Old bottles can be not always in good condition.
Yeah.
I was looking through bottles yesterday from the 40s and 50s in London, and I'm afraid the levels were low shoulder and too much air in the bottle. It would be oxidised, and there's no point having it. It looks so depressing to see a half-empty bottle.
So that's because the cork's shrunk over time?
Well, it is, but yes, cork loses its elasticity after about 30 years. And so even though it may have been lying down, it'll have shrunk, as you say, and more evaporation. It is odd because you look at a bottle and think, well, where's it gone?
Yeah.
And I've opened cases where some bottles have been really good and some bottles have been, well, I think almost empty. And you think there's no stain, there's no nothing. But over time, yes, it's evaporation.
So would it help if obviously storing the wine is key.
Yes.
If it is stored lying down and a little bit of the cork is kept damp, would that prevent some of the evaporation, or is it?
Well, no. It says that they will all be lying down, these things, because the sheer shape of the Bordeaux cases means they have to be lying down because that's the only way they're flat, and they will be all. Yeah, no, and even with good storage, as I say, the difference within a case is amazing at times.
And do you have much of that here?
What problems with that?
Well, yeah, in general. I mean,
no, it's going when I go to visit people to see in their cellars or what have you, and you have to open the cases to see what the bottles look like, obviously, and you do see that occasionally. But no, it's pot luck, and that's what cork. It's a natural product, and it can be a problem.
So going out and visiting some of these potential clients, and I mean, have you had some interesting calls to say, oh, my father's just left me this cellar I didn't even know existed, and X amount of wines there. Can you come and have a look? Has there been any finds, should we say?
I think that's more of a dream that I've had about.
Yeah, okay.
Finding 3 cases of 1899 Chateau Margaux under the bed or something. No. Sometimes there was a chap who had 2 bottles that he found in a house that he bought. This was about 3 years ago. 2 bottles, and they were in sand. And they found it.
What do you mean they're in sand?
Well, they've been buried basically in sand in this house because the house, it was at the ground floor. I don't know why it had got to that level, but it was in a box of sand. Obviously, somebody felt that was the best way of not getting any light or any change of temperature. And when he found them, they were 1870 Dow, which is an extraordinarily old port. 1870. And this is another good thing about your cork question, because one bottle was virtually empty and the other bottle had a surprisingly good level.
So it was lying down under the sand.
Yes. In the bottom of this house for 130 years, 140 years. He found it. And obviously one has to be careful what one's buying. I mean,
of course.
Sometimes, but we don't have problems with people foisting stuff on, but that was good. And it was just great to see. I just love the way it'd been lying there for so long.
Yeah. Why do you think it was in sand?
Well, I do think it's this business, and it stops any temperature differences. You get any light to it.
Yeah,
I mean, a port bottle is dark anyway, but you don't get light onto it. I don't know. There might even have been a reason to hide it. You don't know. I mean, I don't know whether it's. No, I don't know. You may have had a lot of sand, a lot of bottles.
I don't know. Sand.
Yeah.
I'm burying my wine. I know.
We've all done it, haven't we?
Oh yes, I was thinking that.
No, there are occasional times when people bring things out, or you see something and you sort of think, oh, that's rather good. But I think you've always got to be pretty honest about these things and make sure they know what they've got. A lady that we had suddenly found 3 bottles of Chateau d'Yquem from I can't remember which, I think it was 1927 or something like that, and in lovely condition. And she didn't really know she had them either, so it was a nice surprise for them.
Have you? tried any of these bottles, or is it a question of
Well, not at that sort of level. I mean, Sauternes a strange one because I love dessert wines, and we did. It's so difficult to put tastings on. People just don't want them. We did this fantastic tasting going back to 1919, in fact, 1919 to 1971, and we had 10 wines, and it was something ridiculous, like £95 a head, which was nothing to taste wines that averaged about sort of 70 or 80 years old. And we just couldn't sell it. I think we sold 11 tickets out of the 20. I even then started emailing the trade, saying, do you want to come to this tasting? You won't taste these wines again. Nobody came.
Is that because nobody knew what the wines were?
Well, no, they would know what they were, but for some reason there's this strange feeling about dessert wines, and that people say, "Oh, I don't like sweet wine," but it's not good because well-balanced sweet wine is brilliant.
Yeah.
So very sad, but I love dessert wines, but a lot of people don't.
Fair enough. So we were earlier, you and I were discussing Brexit. Obviously, this is on the cards. It's coming up. What are your thoughts for the trade? I mean, particularly your business as well. How do you think it's going to turn out?
Well, I suppose we can curtail that question by saying we don't know.
Yeah,
and I know the news. The news at the moment, they're desperate to get people to make comments about it, but unless they're a top economic advisor. And I'm not sure that they would know either. No, they had this thing on the news the other night with 10 people saying what they thought about Brexit. And I thought, what is the point of asking? They don't know. We don't know what the end result's going to be. So I'm afraid it's all up in the air.
Do you think, so the majority of your customers, I know you mentioned that it's been quite a wide range. Do you think it's going to have any impact on them approaching you?
Well, the most important thing, unfortunately, will be the value of the pound.
Yeah,
the pound was too strong, so this idea of it coming down to 10% because of Brexit was actually not such a bad thing, and it certainly helped people who wanted to export. I think at the end of the day, it's not going to change dramatically. I think that the wealth of the country and employment and all this sort of thing, I don't think it's going to change dramatically. Hopefully that's not just wishful thinking, but I don't think it will. No, but as I say, the value of the pound is the thing that people want. It's what it costs them. That's why they're interested at the moment.
Sure. We've, as you know, specialise in English wines, and that's the industry that I represent and sell for. Have you tried many? I mean, I know I've got some later for us, but of the English wines.
Yeah, over the years I have, and as I mentioned to you yesterday, when I started in 1985, there was this big promotion by a supermarket chain for all their supermarkets dotted around the country that they had to sell the wines from the local vineyard, because there weren't that many local vineyards then, and not many people knew much about it. You could, yes, get business.
Sorry, when was that?
1985.
Okay.
And I think in Waitrose you could get Biddenden, Ortega, and Lamberhurst Priory, and they had a few things like that. But generally speaking, no one drank English wines.
Yeah.
There certainly weren't any sparkling wines then. And it's changed dramatically in recent times. So, yes, in the last 10 years, things have changed. And we always thought we had to rely on a vintage, a year like 76, where we had extreme heat. But it seems that they seem to be able to produce really good wines in pretty ordinary summers.
Yeah. I mean, the summer that we've had, or coming to the end now, I know everybody's getting very excited about it because it's probably one of the best summers on record. And I know that there have already been some record harvests from what I've been told. But I think what's important to note within that is that obviously the whole of Europe's had an incredible summer. So fingers crossed it should just be a good year for wine.
It should be. As I say, I'm just a little bit concerned about it's all very well having the ripening season being perfect, but you just need to have the bit before that, the spring, because you need to have the flowers pollinated to produce the grapes. And I can't help but thinking in some countries they struggle with prolonged cold temperatures well into sort of May. So
like a late spring then, and
yeah, frosts. Well, it really went from winter. Spring was a weekend, from what I can remember, and then it suddenly became summer for 4 months. I mean, as a ripening season, it was perfect because it was never too hot, but it was just consistent all the time. Glorious weather, all the way from June to
Yeah.
Now.
It's been fabulous. Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully they'll produce some lovely wines, yes.
If we look to the future now, where do you see yourself and the business going? What are the plans coming up for Ancient and Modern Wines?
Well, I'm afraid not much different, really. I'm more than happy to continue doing what we're doing. And we're a small company, but I like the model that we've got. I'm very keen on personal contact. Because the thing is, I was brought up in retail for a number of years, and I did like the personal contact. And I do still find that a bit difficult. We do have customers that I've never even met in various parts of the country. I mean, we do everything by phone and email, so it's not a problem. They get the wines they want. But I do sort of miss that bit a bit, yes.
It almost sounds like everyone's ideal customer to a degree.
well, sort of. I mean, whether that's I don't know, but I don't think one's going to be able to change that. But no, I fear it's going to be. I need what you'd rather I came up with some dramatic sort of technological ideas we're going to have. But no, I think
not necessarily. No.
I think again at the end of the day, people just want the wine and they want the service.
Yeah,
and this is why our website is basically listing the wines, and people do say they like the website because it's easy to read. There's no
it's still wine list.
Press this link to get this link to get this link, and you sort of don't. By that stage, you get so bored with it. But they just want to know, what have you got? How much does it cost? Or give me some advice. So, yes, that's not going to change.
Okay, brilliant. Is there, just to round things up, anything else you'd like to say, or any wines particularly want to comment on?
Well, no, I mean, you did. I did see one question that I think you've skirted around, which was about something about having some wine blowing me away or what have you.
Yes. Forgive me, sorry.
No,
any particular wines that, has really caught your attention?
Well, there have been a few over the years that you just sort of, there are tastings where you just sort of think, wow. And they go, again, it's not because of being a heavyweight wine or so over the years, one's been very lucky to have things like 62 Akem and 59 Cheval Blanc. And they've been absolutely wonderful wines, and L'Herbe 90. They just hit the spot at that time. But it's probably more interesting. It's more the one, and I don't like this Eureka moment phrase very much, but when I started in 1985, I did know nothing about sweet wines, and suddenly my Brian Chadwick, the chap who owned Bedford Fine Wines, he opened this half bottle of Chateau Coute 1976, lovely vintage, and when I tasted it, I thought, wow, this is definitely, I've never tasted anything like this. It was just beautifully balanced. It was so floral. It was like tasting a fruit basket, a flower bouquet, all in one. And I thought, well, this is the trade I want to go into, because it was just wonderful. It was a real eye-opener.
Yeah.
And so that's always something that's been on my mind. I've always remembered.
So that was almost the wine.
Yes, I think so, yes. And if you ask other people in the trade, there will be a blowing away moment, if you like, in the early days, and they sort of thought, wow, this is fantastic. I want to taste more of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's one of these wines that you then start looking to see, is there any left in the bottom there, or has he gone out the back because you want to top your glass up? Because it just, you can't believe the flavour of it. And of course, we're very lucky that over the years, one's tasted wines like that many times. Although obviously 6 months anticipation up a bit higher now, so unless something's absolutely terrific, you sort of think, oh. But no, that was the blowing away moment. Yes.
That was the wine.
Yes.
Yeah, and I presume there's not much of that around. You haven't come across any.
We still find things like that, but I'm not sure. The 76 is maybe getting a bit old now, so you have to go a bit more recent. I mean, one thing I find, having been in the trade for 33 years, is that wines that I used to think when I started were very old. It's quite difficult to describe, but for example, if we were in a shop, we used to sell ports, and we used to go back to 1945, so that would be about sort of 40 years old. Well, now we're selling bottles that are 60, 70 years old, and I don't think of them as that old.
Yeah.
And it's awful, because 82 Bordeaux I still think is a recent vintage, which is embarrassing, really, but it's not.
Are these older ports, they're okay to drink, though?
Yeah, ports are pretty indestructible.
Okay.
As long as it's well stored and well cellared, and a lot of people who had the port were sort of landed gentry and aristocracy and what have you, and they had to sell them for cost cutting and things, and they had really good cellars.
Why is it that port will last? I mean,
Fortified wine,
okay.
and also being a sweet wine as well. So the sugar will preserve it, and being fortified will also tend to preserve it as well. I mean, there does come a point. I remember somebody giving me, well, in the early days, actually, a bottle of 1908 Dow, and it was, well, it looked like Amontillado sherry. The colour had all gone, the fruit had all gone. All you were left with was the spirit that made it a fortified wine.
Oh, okay.
So very unpleasant.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
But so it doesn't last forever, but really good vintages last a very long time.
And as you say, as long as it's stored correctly.
Exactly.
And everything,
Yeah,
it will
exactly.
go on. Brilliant. Richard, thank you so much. That's been absolutely wonderful.
Good.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much.